Welcome to Bigger and Louder, everybody. It's your boy Johnny D back with his main man, Big Anthony. How you doing, Big Ant?
How you doing, Johnny? How you doing, my main man?
How you doing? No, how you doing?
How you doing, man? How you doing?
That reminds me of Dude, Where's Your Car, man? Listen, guys, we, like everybody who's listening to the show, have probably been engrossed in the Mr. McMahon documentary and series that was released about 10 days ago from when we're recording this on Netflix. Anthony and I both binged it, right? I think we binged it. And I think my quick take on it was that I started watching it around 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, middle of the week.
Yeah.
And from the first 30 seconds in, I felt chills running down my body, dude. And I had to turn it off. Like, I just felt so electrified, so energized. All the feelings, all the emotions from the Attitude Era, from the late 90s came back through me. And I was like, oh my God, I can't watch this right now. Like, I'm going to not sleep. So I had to watch it during the daytime pretty much exclusively because, yeah, it just was a fucking electrifying. What you think, dude?
Well, I don't know. It sounds like you had an outer body experience, probably much more greater than I did. Did you say you watched it from like 9 in the morning to the end of the evening? You just sat for the whole each episode? Is that what you said you did?
No. I'd say it took me like 3 or 4 days to watch it, and I watched like probably an hour and a half every day across like the span of like the week that it came out. You know, on the weekend, I think I watched like 2 episodes last weekend, and then finished it up Monday, Tuesday, something like that.
Yeah, no, it is a lot. I mean, like I'm pretty big on binging my other Netflix series, but like this one was a bit more of an undertaking because each episode is like pretty much a little over an hour because they really go into very serious, granular stuff regarding him as a person, background, so on. So I pretty much do the same thing. I broke it up I think I knocked mine out in about 3 days, probably did 3 episodes a day, more or less, and then found a way to break that up. But no, I mean, I wish I can sit there and say I had the same type of experience and outer body experience that you had, but I really wasn't that surprised because everything he was saying was pretty much like I had expected. We actually have an old friend of ours from many years ago, high school years ago, who actually works for the company, no names given. And this person pretty much was the whistleblower who came to me personally in a private conversation and said that, the McMahon family is pretty much the exact identical doppelganger of the family on Successions. Like that type of like family dynamic exists in terms of what wealth does to, personality and cognition and, envy and lust. It's all real. Like it's a very real thing.
I don't doubt it.
And it really didn't surprise me. If anything, I was more eager to see how far the rabbit hole was going to go with him. He was very candid. And, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen this yet is that the interview that took place, basically the interview was done before he was notified that he was now brought up on new charges for sex trafficking.
Correct. This was mostly in 2021, right?
Yeah. 2021, right up to the present,
22-ish,
right? Just after COVID, more or less. And then they basically said like he declined to keep commenting because news reports and authorities had pretty much come out saying, listen, they're looking to indict you on sex trafficking, and they had to stop production on the show.
This was the first time around too. This wasn't even about the more detailed trafficking cases, right? This was like just the tip of the iceberg.
Pretty much
2022. Yeah. What's driven him to change most recently as the things that dropped in January of 2024 aren't even talked about, right? In the documentary.
Well, no, yeah, because it's just like, all the information is coming out still. Like, obviously, there's gonna be a whole like legal process, and they gotta get their information accurate, the court cases and all that. Yeah.
Let's just, for the sake of our show, give people like a little bit more backgrounds to like what this Mr. McMahon series is, because I do know like a couple of our listeners were into or aren't big WWE fans, right? So this docuseries is basically a series of interviews, past footage, with in and of wrestlers, and their promoters and WCW, which was the World Championship Wrestling League, including Eric Bischoff. I just think like this got into the world of wrestling much better than anything I've seen lately. You were really seeing in some of these athletes' eyes, dude, some of these wrestlers' eyes, that they were really filtering what they were saying. Like it was like you're seeing it in the moment. Like, I don't want to share that story. Some of them were as bold as to say, like, I don't know what they want us to let out, right? What they want.
Yeah, it almost seems like no
So,
one wanted to incriminate themselves because of all the stuff that
right.
was kind of going on. It's like, while it's public knowledge, but no one wants to implicate themselves regardless and kind of have their reputation ruined. But I think let's just take it back even further, right? I think some people who followed wrestling or have a good idea of wrestling, this is going to be kind of like, you kind of know this, but it's good for one's take on it. But let's talk to the people who kind of a little behind behind the eight ball on this. Again, the WWE wrestling previous was called WWF over like a legal name. It was over the legal logo, but again, it's called World Wrestling Entertainment. And this gentleman, Vince McMahon, basically had purchased the company from his father in the 70s. Years ago, wrestling was kind of what was called like territorial, where you had wrestling organizations that were pretty much mapped out through different sections of the U.S. WWE had the Northeast, you had AEW, you had, a whole bunch of other names and acronyms that just basically span across the entire, United States. And what really kind of made Vince McMahon on the map is that what he ended up doing was he ended up consolidating all of these professionals and talents from all these other farm systems, lack of a better way of saying, and basically brought them over to his, and everyone kind of shut down. He kind of broke like the unwritten rule, which is basically don't poach. Everyone's kind of in the same business. And without going to the politics of it, he kind of did what like Donald Trump did back in his real estate years, where his father was in real estate. He came around and took over the business and did it much better. He had a better idea with it. And that's essentially how he came to be. So that's kind of like how, Vince McMahon became, sort of like the name staple and, the big name in the industry for a short while, bringing guys like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man. He brought in guys like Ultimate Warrior, Andre the Giant, Mean Gene.
Anthony, what are you're talking about his dad, I hope. Because you're like totally incorrect. Like Andre the Giant, Hulk, these guys were not like, they were
stars yet
before.
Right. And let me correct myself.
Andre the Giant was like the biggest star in wrestling in the world before Vince McMahon, while he was still sucking from his mama's tit.
Yeah, okay? But all right, let me correct myself then. So allow me to let me redact and like just tweak it a little bit. He made them bigger stars when he took over his segment than what
he made them huge. Vince McMahon is one of the best,
made him huge,
best businessmen. Like, and I think that he is such apparently a deplorable human being that if you can separate the businessman from that, which really you can't.
Yeah, he's still a piece of shit.
What he did for like exactly.
Still a piece of
whatever
shit.
He did for wrestling is just like undeniable, right? It's undeniable. And for me and you, right, we've talked about this. Like, wrestling was a huge part of our late elementary through maybe like right until we got to high school, right, or just into high school, maybe our freshman sophomore year. And I think the Attitude Era, that's when and especially according to the documentary, took a real hard swing towards like adult culture. Like, they were going for that 18 to 34-year-old, not the 14-year-old. And we had the Generation X, we had NWO, just things that like I honestly got emotional watching it, because like it's undeniable. These wrestlers, these characters had an influence on who we are today as adults.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, exactly. So let's just break it down to some of the bigger names in each of the generations. You have the Golden Era. These are guys like Hulk Hogan, Andre, Ultimate Warrior, Macho. That's kind of like their
Macho.
Generation. Then you're the new generation. These are guys who are coming up like, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, guys like, Diesel, there was that segment from like 93 to 97, and then became the Attitude Era, which we're going to get into in a minute, and kind of like how each was kind of like its own little dynamic when it was, but like where it kind of off that. Yeah, I mean, listen, like at the end of the day, it's a business, and he, as a business, he said it's called like sports entertainment. You've heard me even say about it, like in real live athletic competition like football. It's called sports entertainment, meaning like, while that might be real on the field or on the basketball court, it's entertainment, right? Like like I said, they're there to entertain you as spectators. And same thing here. It's more like someone said, like, it's called, wrestling theater, if you will. Like, never say, again, if you're ever around a professional wrestler, there is an unwritten rule that you never say that wrestling is fake, right? You can say it's scripted.
Hey, babe.
It's all talked up. It's all, there's spots, etc. It's all choreographed, but do never say it's fake, because these guys,
You don't break character. You don't break character.
You don't break character, right? And that's another part of it too, that they even talked about, like where the industry was kind of going when their competitors were kind of like taking over the helm in the ratings. But no, I mean, he really took his lumps like any other business person, right? Like, he had the highest ratings in the golden era. The new generation, not so much. That's when WCW and Ted Turner's people were kind of like capitalizing on the NWO and what was kind of going on over there for several years. And then Vince kind of like flipped it on them and skyrocketed with where public television was at the time. But yeah, I mean,
Salacious. I thought the most telling thing to me, and why I don't blame them for the kind of content that they're producing, and like how salacious you say as it got, is because when he comes out and he says early on in the series that he doesn't set the culture, he advances it, he rides off of it, he thrives off of it, and he emulates it. And that's just so true. Like, if you really go back and you were listening to the story and watch the kind of the evolution of that soap opera through the 80s and 90s, it was based on what was happening, politically and geopolitically, like internationally, right? We had like the American heroes, then we had, kind of like
Soviets.
the Soviet guys, and then like, we had, not necessarily Soviet, but remember they talk about how Sergeant Slaughter turned into like the Iranian guy, sympathizer, and we ended up getting like death threats, right? So this was basically pulling from reality, right? They were like watching the news and private and saying, all right, well, I guess that's what we're doing. And I also think, and it was really sympathetic to like Bret Hart and his story, and obviously, of course, what happened to his brother Owen Hart, tragically passed away on live television in front of an audience or stadium full of people. I think like his story was really empathetic, but like his whole thing was like the passion behind it was there. And like, these guys were competitors. They wanted that story. They wanted the glory of it. And that's what like was driving them to kind of like beat themselves up every night. Right. And I think, it wasn't on them to necessarily set the tone, right? Like, they're not like quote unquote major like sports athletes. Like, they're not football players and basketball players who like guys would look up to and say like, oh, well, we should be watching these guys and like, doing whatever they're doing. Right. Back in the 80s, like, athletes weren't regarded and asked about their political stances. And in the 90s too, right? Jordan is famous for saying, Republicans buy sneakers too. So I think like they get a pass, wrestlers, for me, for the things that they were made to do. And I believe it was him, but I'm not going to remember who exactly it was, who Bret Hart that being, that said, these are just stories. We are just telling you stories. And like any other TV show, you can't blame the stories they tell on the people that are acting them out or whatever, right? Like,
I feel like McMahon said that because that would be something he would say when someone wants a question.
I'm sure he was maybe it was.
Yeah, I mean, look, people, like, at the end of the day, like, there's something you need to know. And I've said, these guys are taking what's called like lumps. Like, when they get picked up and thrown down, they are being like their body's being sacrificed to get up and hit the floor and get up and jump over things and take hits and take shots. Like, it's not fake. Like, so again, it's all staged and choreographed in that regards. The thing that I guess we should also as well as highlight, I think something you mentioned to John before we get back onto McMahon himself, is kind of like what would motivate someone to kind of go into this sort of like career, right? Like, I guess like, and I'm gonna here's my 2 cents on it. Like, I don't think that anyone just wakes up one day and says, listen, I want to get thrown into a belt buckle every day and get kicked in the face and do, yes, it is stage and it's all, there's a spots and things like that. But when you do this, 7 days a week for 365 days out of the year, and you're just getting up and getting thrown on the floor and taking hits and putting pressure and stress on your
with
back,
chairs.
like you're getting it catches up to you. And they said guys were taking pills, so like it's kind of like what Dwayne Johnson said. I think I may have mentioned this reference once before in our other episodes, but he kind of said it in the show Ballers when his character was kind of going through some medical issues with like his back and his hip and whatever. And he said, as a football player, he's like, what sane person would choose a career where your job is to run headfirst into an immovable object for 8 hours a day and do like it? And it doesn't make any sense. And I kind of always ask me, like, why are you doing? Yes, it is staged, and yeah, like someone's helping you kind of carry out the show, but like your body is taking a toll, and you're not going to be 25, 26 years old anymore. As they say, like you're going to burn the candle at both ends. And we're finding out that guys were like double dipping in painkillers and muscle relaxers and just anything to keep their jobs for what we might call then mediocre pay. Now the system's kind of changed a little bit where it does favor the stars now in terms of having a more better schedule where they're not required to work 7 days a week, holidays and things like that. And maybe they go under a contract where they can make a number of appearances versus having to go out there every night. And these are the kind of things where like Hogan even talks about, like just doing that day after day. Like he's surprised more people aren't even dead with the all the extra overdoses they were doing on painkillers. And it's honestly, I always wanted to know what motivates someone to do this. It's not, I will not say the word fake, but it's not real. It's not like Roman Greco wrestling you see in the Olympics, because that's real. This is staged.
First of all, Kurt Angle, who
Mhm.
was an Olympic gold medalist,
Yeah.
joined the WWE.
Yeah.
What,
If you
what's
hear
saying?
his story, yeah. If you ever hear him on Joe Rogan's show, he talks about all the problems he's had. He's had his neck fused several times, his hips fused. He went to, I think, South America for a stem cell.
Well, okay, let's just take this. Let me just say, like, what would motivate us? I mean, look, like me, dude, we wrestled in my neighborhood against each other. We had 4 boys. Like, shout out to the squad there, dude. Like, Totems with his ankle lock. I think it's like wrestling just became part of our childhood, and some people maybe they don't play real, again, like say real sports, but like classical sports, traditional sports, like football or whatever, or they've gotten hurt doing that, like is the case with Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who I still call him The Rock. My kids call him Dwayne Johnson. Like it's just, these guys, like it's entertainment. So they're entertainers, but maybe they're not good actors necessarily. Same thing with the soap opera. Soap operas oftentimes, yeah, they produce good actors. Like guys get their starts there, people get their start there. But oftentimes those are not the best actors. They're more good-looking faces that can say lines and remember lines, right?
Hey, I
So
guess
maybe
man.
it's like that. And again, now they get paid more. And there's another thing too. Like we're Americans. We love violence. And wrestling is something that's been around since, like you mentioned, like Roman times, right? Greek times, or probably even before that. So yeah, our Western ways think, yeah, it started a couple thousand years ago. But wrestling is something that I'm sure has been around for millennia, and it's like our terms of it's the best thing we get to gladiator now, like UFC and things like that, which they compare to, and WWE had the chance to purchase, back in the late 90s or early 2000s, I think it was, when it was first getting really hot, which they declined to do because Vince was too prideful. That kind of stuff to me, it's like it's brutal, but it's like it's pretending that it's not. And tell me if you agree with this. Like, let's just say you're in the octagon, not like these guys wail on each other, dude. The kicks and the fractures and the breaks and the injuries that I've seen are grotesque, like the most grotesque, right? And the guy's getting knocked the fuck out, just to put it lightly.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't allow like everything. Like you can't grab the cage, you can't do this, like you can't hand the back of the head. It's like, you know what? You're like, just make it no holds barred. Like we're right there. Like what? Why not? Like, oh, because someone can get killed. Someone can get killed anyway. Right. And I think that's like, if these guys are really fighting, it needs to be like, call it what it is. Like, they're not the gladiators. That's not like it's something shy of that. I don't know. That's why I'm not big on UFC. Like, there's not necessarily a sport to it. It's just brutality and, you know, obviously martial arts, but it's things that are lethal. Like, those skills are more lethal, right? Like, you know, you want to kick someone's fucking ass, knock them out, kill them, disable them, you know, break their arms, you know, and things like that. But it's like, oh, I'm gonna tap out. Like, all right, whatever, man. Like,
So I guess I'm a little. So I guess what are you saying? Are you saying that comparing UFC, you're saying you don't like the fact that there's rules that prevent someone from gaining the advantage by, as you mentioned, using the cage or kicking someone from the back of the head? Like there's something
yeah, or
that
like biting, you know, it's like, dude, just like let it all out. Like, let's just
well,
go across the line.
but that's the thing. Like it's supposed to be fair competition. Let's here's the other way around it, right? That's like let's take boxing, right? Let's just take two amateur boxers. It's like, okay, let's say I get the guy against the ropes. Does that mean I pick the rope up, put him around him, and tie him into it and beat the shit out of him? No, there's got to
Well,
be
now here's the thing
parameters
with
to it,
boxing.
right?
Now here's the thing with boxing. I prefer boxing immensely. Like, I don't like to say love. People would be like, this motherfucker doesn't love it. He couldn't even tell me who's champion right now. I like watching it. You know, I'm not going to say that I love it, but I do really like watching boxing. And if there's big fights, like, I will try to tune in or go to, you know, to a bar or whatever. But I enjoy boxing more as a sport because of the limited rules where you know, it's, hey, you can only punch. You can you know, you can't kick, you can't use the ropes, and it's like very, very limited. Where it's like UFC is like, hey, we're playing, you know, 80 yards of the field, but we're leaving those last 10 yards on either side. Like, don't do that.
Well, I think you're trying to compare apples to oranges, right? Because there's a difference between boxing, which is defined as just only using your hands, versus mixed martial arts, which is a combination of hands, legs, grapples. You know, that's kind of like the realm of the rules that favor that because it is an actual art behind that type of fighting style. Um, but again, like, you know, to say like, you know, boxing, because again, like the example I give again is like if you're going to argue, say like, well, they're not using the cage for leverage in the UFC, and you know the boxers are going to have the same thing where they're not going to be able to use anything else besides that other than just their boxing gloves and just in the, you know, the square circle. But like I said, it's just the point is like I don't understand like what motivates people to go into these sort of aggressive, you know, sports anymore. I get when you're young, you think you're invincible. And listen, if you want to have a career as a mixed martial artist or as a fighter and jeopardize your physical, mental health, you know, God willing, God bless you. But back to wrestling though, I mean, the thing is like, yes, it's staged, but I would make the argument, I really would make the argument and say like they're probably more at jeopardy to sustain longer injuries because they have to put on a show more frequently than a prize fighter does. Right. Yeah, the prize fighter has to, you know,
Oh,
take his
well, yeah,
fight.
way more.
Right. Like there's no disputing it. Like, right. And that's what they have to
Once,
go
twice, three times a week.
and that's it. But like a wrestler had, you know, like right, like if we're looking at WE, they probably have to go through 4 or 5 shows a week, right, and do that every week or once every other week, and it adds up. Whereas a prize fighter, whatever your area is, right, you train, you take a semester, you take a time off, you go back to training, sparring, do the fight, and it's done. That's pretty much it, right? You have a much more controllable. So I
Yeah,
would
one
argue and say
salt.
like these yeah, so I would argue and say like, you know, WWE is basically someone like if you really want to have fucked up problems, go right into it. But to get back to Vince though, something that really one thing I will say I was startled and I don't want to say actually no, startled's a really bad word. I want to say I was um I didn't expect this coming out of him because a lot of us all thought like he was born with a silver spoon in his
Surprised?
mouth. He wasn't. So, spoiler alert for anyone who didn't see this, this gentleman we're talking about actually his father had left him from the birth, you know, age of 0. He actually grew up in a trailer park. I never knew that. He's actually a self-made, well, I shouldn't say, oh, it depends on your definition of self-made billionaire, but he actually had the first 12 years of his life, he said, was completely rocky. He had a stepfather who was completely abusive and arrogant, so on and so forth. And eventually he had his real biological father who took him under his wing and sort of like picked up where it was off. But he said like his biological father was no better. He was just more the strong, silent type who just thought about business, business, business. So that was actually something very surprising to me. You know, this guy actually grew up in a trailer park for, you know, the better, you know, first half of his younger life. And I didn't knew that. I thought he actually he came from money. That's the truth of it.
Well, I mean, it depends how you look at it because his father had money because he was like the biggest promoter in his region and one of the like regarded among like a lot of the old timers as like the best, one of the best or like top promoter, and chose to ignore his fucking family. So yeah, like it's sad. I believe that, but it's like it's not his dad. It's like he abandoned them. Like, which I think
Right.
if if you're up with today's psychological profiles, is like, yo, that probably had a lot to do with how Mr. McMahon turned out, right? Where his stepfather beat him. There's allegations they talk about in the documentary of potentially his mother abusing him in some type of way. And it's just like, that type of stuff stays with you forever. And it's not an excuse, but, and I'm, again, not trying to diagnose the guy, but this is just all regurgitation of, what I think is really fucking plausible. It's like this guy had a really troubled childhood, and his sick, twisted, type of manipulative and demeaning behavior has a lot to do with what he was exposed to as a young boy. So, you make a really good point, dude.
Yeah. I mean, listen, some people,
right?
I think some people, like a lot of people, they can bottle it up and deal with it and just push on. Like he said, like I just dealt with it and moved on with life. And
I dealt with it, moved on, and now I, traffic young ladies among our pro wrestlers.
Pretty much.
Sexual favors with them as in the contracts. Unbelievable. What do you think about, because we were talking about the kind of the injuries, right, across all contact sports and what would cause people to want to do it. But what do you think about like Christopher Nowinski, who was mentioned in the documentary of being like the first wrestler to really say, "Look, Mr. McMahon, like I've got this. This happened to me. Like I have brain damage because of the sport," and showed him examples of it. Clearly, and the tragic case of Chris Benoit, and to just quickly tell you there, the guy fucking killed his whole family and murdered suicided the whole thing. But was pretty much attributed to these violent acts, which happens in football players too, right? Yep.
So
what do you think about that? Sorry. So wait, hold on. Let me finish like wrapping up with the question, and just to put the question mark on the end of this sentence for you is, what do you think of Mr. McMahon's take on it, who initially balked, but then actually was pretty helpful, and I believe started to help fund a lot of the research behind it? Were you surprised about that, or what'd you think?
Well, I want to slightly correct you. Chris Nowinski, I think he didn't have brain damage. He actually had a concussion, which is very common, in any contact sport, like whether you get kicked in the face or you fall. A lot of people get them, right? Like it's just really like, are you someone who's going to keep engaging in such activities where you are at a higher risk to get another concussion again and again and again and again, right? And
thank you for that, because I remember now you can only study CTE on a deceased brain, right?
Exactly. Like, and that's the scary part. So I had we'll get into that. I mean, we're getting really fucking deep here, folks, but like, yeah, CTE, if you guys don't know what that is, it's a really tongue twister, but basically it's when your brain has actually taken so many hits and so much trauma over a duration of time in your life that the brain acts like it's a neurodegenerative disease where the brain essentially rots. It actually rots. And going back to, here's another example, just to make a comparison. If anyone ever wants to Google this, if you actually go on Google and Google images of Aaron Hernandez's brain, he was the New England Patriot guy, tight end who passed away. He committed suicide. When they actually agreed to take his brain out for further science, they took his brain and compared to another cadaver, and they said it was completely night and day of how his brain actually looked compared to the healthy brain. And this was suspected of him just taking hits from a young age in Pop Warner to high school, college, the pros, which actually aided in his behaviors, which again changes behavior, your mental status, you have anger problems, you're emotional, you're depressed,
right,
etc. It makes you do crazy stuff. Now, again, Chris Nowinski, he was actually a wrestler, got a concussion, and he's just like, listen, fuck this shit. This is not worth my fucking brain health for the rest of my life. Again, you can get concussions, and not everyone gets CTE. It's not something that if you get one concussion, it's like, oh my God, look out.
It's from it's chronic traumatic
head trauma over years and years,
or some shit like that.
Yeah,
I can't.
It's yes. Again, the E part is basically it's ill tongue twisted for a lot of us, but right, the rule of thumb is like if you're in a profession or where you're just taking headshots and your head's like constantly at risk on a regular basis for years, you're likely to develop this over. And again, not everyone gets it because there's many other contact people who've done contact sports never got it. So it's not, again.
Well, I think like that's not, I think that that's what the debate is, because again, you can only really see this on a deceased brain.
Correct.
And they haven't been studying it for that long. And while I think that they're getting like to relatively good sample sizes, I'm sure, I think it's like, hey, would you be open to donating your brain?
Me?
What, like, yeah, like,
I mean,
yeah, what do
honestly,
you think?
I don't know. I would. I mean, I know it's kind of weird. It's like, would you want to be an organ donor? I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. Someone's gonna take out your organs, and I mean, it's weird. I mean, like, I would like to. I don't know. It's a hard question.
I guess like for me, the answer
would
is
you? I mean,
yes,
would you?
because I look like I'm not going to sit here and say that like I think I have that, but I would rather my brain, because I played football from 6 years old. You started in high school, right? I started at 6, like right going into first grade. And I ended up, because of my size, my second year, playing with dudes that were like 2 or 3 years older than me, but like in my weight class, because back
Yeah,
then
yeah.
that's how it was. And I remember like back then, like literally the snot flying out of my fucking nose and be like, this, the snot, because back then that we would do this drill called bull in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was is one player would be in the middle and everybody on the outside would like have a number or whatever, or like, their number on their jersey or whatever it was. And the coach would call it and you'd have to like, look around and they would run from the outside and fucking hit you. And you'd
It's
have to get
outlawed
up or
now.
like hit the right. Exactly. And like shit like that. Like, yeah, it was cool at the time. You feel tough. Like, all right, like I could take a fucking hit from anybody, but who knows how that was. I stopped playing at the end of high school, right? I wasn't going to play in college, and that was the end of my career. So it's like, I wonder, God forbid, should I have continued, what that really looked like. And for me, it's a struggle because like my boy is now like of age where it's an option. And I think it's like, we might have even touched on this at some point, but like, I think at first I want him to play like a year or two of flag because I want him to understand some of those like, more fundamental skills that don't require necessarily the hitting piece yet. 3-point stance, taking your first step, understanding like pass tree, the route trees, and the different types of defensive structures, right? And how they play like man versus zone, and the light things that they do in flag football. And then it's like, all right, maybe when he gets to middle school or something, and especially if he's like a good athlete, let's fucking do it. In our family here, like all my brother-in-law, my all our cousins, they played baseball. And baseball, I think, is a great sport for kids to play. And not to say that that's completely adverse to concussions or head trauma. And just like anything else, you can get injured severely. But baseball is probably the least impactful on your body if you're not a pitcher, right? Like we know what pitching can do to young kids' arms. But if you're a shortstop, a first baseman, a catcher, you can definitely get more bang for your buck. And as a father, I would feel like, if I had my son to pick, like, look at like Russell Wilson or some of these guys that had like baseball, offers or were drafted by baseball teams. I would be like, play fucking baseball, dude. Be safe. Play baseball, please. As
Baseball,
much as I love football, I love football, dude.
You can take a line fucking drive to a fucking baseball to the fucking temple, man. Have the same problems. It's
you
like
but you wear a helmet. You see it coming.
I guess, but like, listen, I would argue and say, listen, I don't think you or any other John Doe who played just general football from Pop Warner to the present or to high school really has anything to worry about. It's really the people who continued that path from high school to college and then into the professional and doing it for the long haul, right? Like that's what they're talking. It's someone who has gone years of like doing this. And the unfortunate thing is like in these fucking tough guy sports is like, if you're hurt, they say, get back in there and do it. Like, it's just like toughen up. But something like this is why the NFL has now been cracking. I mean, listen, the NFL has been sued every which way, up, down, left, right, here, there, whatever, in terms of the concussion cases that came out later in the year. So they're doing everything they can to show they're making adjustments. But again, we're kind of going off script here, but like back to WWE, there was a wrestler, who actually was diagnosed with CTE, right? There was a wrestler, his name was Chris Benoit. Okay, and he was, and if for you guys don't know this, is like wrestlers in the industry would actually finish the show out with some sort of interesting move that was just set their character there, right? This guy's move was to finish the show by jumping off the rope and smashing his head into his opponent every night, night after night. So you can you can't do that. Like you just can't do that. And that's what it was. And the guy, and it's Dr. Prince Lewinsky had basically said, listen, like after they died, they looked at his brain, they said that he had it. Like, and that was just, and a lot of people think it's taboo. It's not real. It's just,
Stone Cold came out and said it. A lot of people were interpreting what Stone Cold said as, oh, he doesn't believe it as, Chris Benoit's driving incident, or like what broke Chris Benoit. But I'm like, well, that's not how they, edited it. Like the way it was, right. Like he's like, I don't believe in CTE, and I'm like, well,
yeah,
I think it's he's my favorite. Yeah. He's my favorite wrestler, but like I don't know. I think you might be wrong there.
I mean, listen, he had a concussion, and he had head trauma, he had his neck fused, etc. He was concussed, but like it's understandable to believe when guys like the Undertaker who said like these guys were taking shots to the head from chairs, jumping off on tables and things like that, and they never really had such problems later in life. So it's understandable why they don't believe that this is actually a real thing. But again, not everyone gets it. It's just some people are more prone to getting it with years of this kind of like abuse of the fucking head. And this is what they're trying to study now. You obviously can't diagnose a real person in real life until they're deceased to look at the brain
a real person.
A real person. However, is that
a live person.
A live person. So what they're doing now is very similar to kind of like testing with like, here's like a comparison so you can kind of understand it, just comparing apples to oranges a bit. So when you look at a disease like HIV, for example, they're going to look at, let's say, how many more white blood cells your body's actually developing in lieu of contracting the disease. For CTE, what they're looking at is your brain developing the tau protein. And this protein is basically an indicator on a neural scan, like an X-ray and an MRI and a CAT scan, that shows like your brain is actually building up more tau of this protein, which means that you are likely actually in process of getting it, or you already have it and it's going to escalate because it's neurodegenerative. It gets worse. It doesn't stop. So that's what they're looking for. And they're trying to enhance that science right now. But unfortunately, the science and the studies weren't really built back then. We knew about them, but there wasn't enough money and effort to understand it even further than what we did.
Yeah, for anybody that didn't know, since our last episode, Anthony went back to school and got his medical degree. So take it from him.
Yeah, take it from me.
I think like moving on with the episodes too, and just to kind of finish up with my take on that show, I would strongly recommend it to anybody. I think that it kept my attention. It was electrifying hearing from the Undertaker, The Rock, Stone Cold, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Booker T, to name a few, right? I think Atlas, those guys,
Tony Atlas.
Obviously, Tony Atlas, a lot of those guys, that was great to see.
Let me ask you some question. Then let's speak around McMahon. I kind of want to ask this. So we obviously know what a scum, what a piece of shit he is. Yeah, he's a good businessman and he did what he had to do, etc. But I guess, like, in your opinion, like, if you had to look back and kind of respect him, or kind of like, hey man, like, this is where I know you're really good at your job. Hey, from that documentary, from the time he took over the reins as the owner to sort of the present, was there anything that said to you, man, like, this is actually really smart of you to do, such as, or, it's like, you as a person suck, but something, I can respect this, or I can, wow, that's really impressive, or anything at all that you can sit back and be like,
I mean, if you get to pick and choose on the guy, I would say that I would. Yeah, if you could pick and choose on the guy, like, I would respect what he did early on, where he like decided to cross over the territories and like, quote unquote, unite them or compete with them, or I respect that. That took a lot of balls, especially back then. And like, those guys were probably as quick to threaten him, to bust up his knees as anything else. So I respect that. But if we're gonna give thumbs up or thumbs down, fucking down, dude.
Thumbs down.
I would say down. And I think that for any kid, or for those of us that are still fans, you can find a lot of good in it, especially like storylines have changed. The respect that and the attention that they're giving to like the female athletes, I think is awesome now. You know,
Mhm.
back in the day, like they were beautiful, like models, right? Yeah,
They still
and
kind of
of
are,
course
right?
athletes. But yeah, like today, like of course, like they're good. Like most of them are super good looking, but they have athletes. Now these are women that are jumping off and doing the same moves that guys are doing, and fighting in the same matches and having like the same kind of stakes around them regarding like
Yeah.
their belts and championships. So like I think that's super cool. But the toys have taken a big fucking downfall. Back in the
Mhm.
day, they had some really cool WWE, WWF, as we used to say,
It
toys.
was at a
Like I know
time,
I had
yeah.
the ring. I had the
Yeah.
ring. I had like
Yep.
some action figures. I
I
didn't
had the
have any
doll
of the
I
old
had
stuffed animals though.
I had the pillows, the ones that you could wrestle with. That was a cool selling point. You had all the wrestlers that were
Yeah,
pillows.
the
Those are
ones that were
cool.
like had their arms like
Yep, those ones.
yeah,
So
like this
from
like
yeah. So for me, I think one of and again, I don't know what word to use with him, but like just something to say like, wow, like
deplorable.
yeah, something I can applaud him on is really like when his ratings were really going to shit. This is really like towards when WCW Ted Turner's network was really taking off. They had recruited all their top stars, and Vince was kind of like doing the same stories over again, the same gimmicky characters, whatever. I respect the fact that he actually did something that, which everyone does if you're smart, which is taking something that's kind of working in the world and doing it better. So there's two things he did. The first thing he did internally was like he basically did his own NWO with Degeneration X, and then becoming that was the new Attitude Era. That was really the start of it, right? They took over they were the Clique, whatever. He just did it better. Second thing he did that add to his credit, he got himself involved more in the story as they hated boss between him and his top star, because this was really the time when trash television was really at its highest. So for anyone who wasn't
Jerry
around,
Springer.
Jerry Springer, if you remember shows like well, the shows were out there. Like a lot of the cheap stuff, like I mean, not to say Chuck Norris's stuff was the Walker Texas Ranger. I wouldn't say that's trash, but like it's just garbage stuff. Maury Povich was taking off too at those days, and other shows that were really that's what he was trying to emanate in the WWE. But anyway, the point is that
Okay.
that's what he just did it better, and that's where people were drawing to their attention to the Attitude and why it was so popular and why it was the way it was. That's something I give kudos to. Is like when his ratings were going down and his business was about to crash or sell, he could have sold it. He didn't. He kept fighting, kept like just doing something better. And
Yeah,
he
and I mean,
said,
I really liked what WCW did. I think like the ability for them to go out and offer these big contracts and kind of pillage. Like I think WCW, what Eric Bischoff was able to put together was really fucking thrilling. And what I would say, without them, the WWE would not have become what it did.
no,
Right. I think
no,
because the competition, makes everybody try a little harder. Right. And, when you're king forever, you don't put any effort in. So I think like that's where their drive, their storylines, like those factions, is this real? Is this not real? What the hell is going on? What am I watching here? Like, is that really his boss? Like, who would hit their boss with a chair? Who would take
right.
the microphone and, and take over the broadcast? Right. Like, when we were kids,
Yeah.
it's like, what the hell is happening here?
It
This
was
is
over the
crazy.
top. It didn't follow the
And,
normal structure that everyone
and,
was used to.
right. They were following that structure. And what I think was awesome is WCW was willing to take like more chances, right? They didn't have much to lose. They were getting eaten up by Ted Turner. They were owned by a huge conglomerate. And he was throwing money at it and to make it successful. So, I think I applaud that work that really drove WWE to be what it was, man. But
Yeah.
I think, again, if you haven't, check it out. Check us out. Bigger and Louder Show. Instagram, Facebook, Podbean, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever your podcasts are, baby. Thank you for joining us. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. This is Bigger and Louder with Anthony and John. Stay tuned for more.
Later.